Hey everybody, this is PD from the Spinner Rack, and I am well. I've been trying to do a Avengers video on the sales, and I think Comichron they did a Avengers sales. They gathered all of the postal information that said about the Avengers sales, the ups and downs, and they pointed out a couple of highs, which would be one which I have correct, which was in the 80s. And then, of course, the big success in the Heroes, what is it? Heroes Reborn with Rob Liefeld, and later with Bendis, which obviously it's hard to say that, with comparison to the Rob Liefeld coming off of Image success doing the Avengers was possibly the biggest moment in Avengers history up until the MCU with the big movie hits. So with that said, we're going to go through a little bit of Avengers history. So right now in the background, I have this 75 Years of Marvel, which has the classic Avengers 4 cover. I also have a little homemade picture book of the Avengers here. There's a nice thing on the back with some, I guess, a fan colored thing, just stuff, pulled off a line, and but it's a good example to let you know of the Avengers. Now, what do I have here? Before I go to any comic books, let's just go over the Avengers history. The basic history of the publication is that Stan was introducing more comic titles, superhero titles. And of course, since he already did the Fantastic Four, he did one. Now he decided to do one where he gathered all the heroes that was in their universe, which would be Hulk, Thor, Iron Man, Wasp, and Giant Man, and put them in one book called The Avengers. Now, one of the tricks, one of the things you can notice with Stan's work at that time, when he had successes like Thor and in the Fantastic Four, and or Spider-Man, their mainstay of Kirby would stay on the title. But if the book started dropping, like say the X-Men or Sergeant Fury or the Avengers, Kirby would be yanked, and he'd possibly do some layouts, but then he would move on to other stuff. And it's no different with the Avengers. He's pulled off around issues, I think 6 or 7, probably early, just the same way like Sergeant Fury, where he wasn't on that book for very long. And the big difference was that Stan also leaves. And when Stan leaves, he takes 4 of the classic characters. He takes Thor, takes Iron Man, takes Giant Man, and Wasp off the team. Now there's, I have a theory that ultimately, when you have these guys in the book, they kind of, for readers, they kind of don't want to buy the solo books. And I think Thor was one of the a bigger seller under Fantastic Four, and Spider-Man is probably the next top book that the X-Men had, that Stan Lee had. So it makes sense that he would move these guys, and he wouldn't let them keep these characters in there until Giant Man and Wasp lost their book. So they came back to the Avengers. Captain America, when he got his own book and they introduced the Black Panther, Cap was swapped out and the Black Panther took over. And he becomes the Cap, the sort of human, like sort of the action hero character in the book. Now, and Roy Thomas also confirms that Stan would not allow the big three that are here to be in the book for that long. He can only be there for a little while. And then I think Roy sort of, hit his stride. I mean, he did some classic stuff with Don Heck, but then when he got with John Buscema, they brought in the Vision, and it got some classic stories going on there. Then Roy went on to even bigger success as far as fandom with the Kree Skull War with Neil Adams. You had that sort of thing happening. Roy sort of becoming the editor-in-chief, sort of the big guy at Marvel, right under Stan. And then next thing you know, I think Steve Englehart takes over the book, and he has some classic stories, a lot of stuff with Vision, marrying Scarlet Witch and Vision. He does the giant-sized Avengers, which you have Kang versus Ramatut, and all these big things going on. And then what else happens? So post that part. Once Steve Englehart is gone, then Jim Shooter goes on. Now we can go to the Comichron thing now, since that kind of is going to cover most of our Avengers stuff. And let's do that. So yeah, they do this nice nifty thing where they went through all the United States Postal Service statement of ownerships. And if you look at this with me, they point out that how the sales are going down. They say sales decline. Those titles in the 1960s, but held steady into the 70s and improved around 1979 during Jim Shooter's return tenure to the title. Now, let's go back. Let's look at this time when Jim Shooter was first on the title. Well, he did his classic story with the Korvac story. There's other classics like the Bride of Ultron, the Super Nefarious storyline. This would be kind of around 76 and 79, possibly, no, 76, 79. So if you look at that, sales are kind of going down on if we're counting what they're saying, it's kind of declining, although not that much. It's not terrible. Well, no, it goes up in 79, but this goes up a tiny bit. Did it? No. Actually, the actual stuff they copies they printed went up, but the actual sales goes down, and then in 79 it goes up. It goes up considerably, and we don't know if that's the direct sales market, if they printed more issues for the direct sales, but it is a big jump up. But can we attribute that to Jim Shooter? Because that's what they said. And we go to 79. This is Avengers 193, and that's written by David Michelini. I think he's the main writer on the title. I think Stephen Grant possibly does some fill-ins. Jim Shooter gives I think a plot for 200 and 203 or 202. But this is David Michelini and George Perez's period on the book. So if we're going to attribute this sort of success to someone, we have to give it to those guys. So if we got that 79, let's go to 80. We go to 80, it jumps up even more. And Shooter isn't on the book yet. In 206, he's still not on the book. He comes on the book, I think it's 211. And that would be 1981, which is a slight dip, but I mean, it's doing well better. So it's like, let's sort of give the people who, I mean, not that David Michelini is lesser known, but if we're going to give it to the writer, like, come on, we got to give it to Perez and David Michelini then. So then Shooter isn't on that long. He's on there for a year. It's like 81, I guess some part of 80 and 81, he's on the title. And then it's Roger Stern around 82. And you can see the title starts to pick up, right? So we can't sort of just throw it only the success to Shooter. We can give some to Roger Stern also. Roger Stern and Al Milgrom, and then later Roger Stern and John Buscema comes back. But then I think they pointed out that the West Coast Avengers came along. Now with this steadily increase in the title, it keeps going up, right? 84 goes up, 85, the title is going, oh yeah, look at that. In 86, there's a dip. Now we could factor in the West Coast Avengers, but the West Coast Avenger was a miniseries first. So that's to test if this would dip from the other one, and if it was a success, they would keep it going. So maybe it was a hit, who knows? But also at the same time in 86, you see that dip going on there. Roger Stern is sort of fired off with the book, right? So you see this dip in sales, and it's dropping a lot, which is kind of tough to see, right? It's a big drop in sales on the title. So maybe it's, as Comichron is saying, maybe it's because we lost Roger Stern and the book is sort of in turmoil. Because at this point, it's sort of pinch hitting in this time where up until I guess you say 87. In 87, that's when Walter Simonson is on the book. And he's only on the book for like 9 issues. And there's another sort of editorial thing that happens. So it's like for the next period, the book is the next sort of 5 issues, the book is in, or 4 issues, the book is in flux. So this could also affect readers, in my opinion, because I was buying the book at the time. And I didn't buy it after 300 until I heard John Byrne was working on the book. So we're going to factor this in. John Byrne had a big bump when he got back to Marvel in 89, or I guess it's 88 or 89. When he got back to Marvel, he does a West Coast Avenger, and that book, that title sort of goes up in sales because it was dipping down. So with that, let's look at the Avengers sales. So at the same time, the Avengers is from where it was in 87, it's like way lower. This is really lower, but it looks like, does it look like it's going to be popping up? Not yet. So if we go to 90, right? 90 from 201,000 to 207,000, that's a bump up. So we can look at 1990 or 89 and we can see what was going on around that period, why there would be this sort of increase, and if we look at that, so we can't say that it was just all bad. You can see it pick back up. And if we go to at this point, 89, where, the end of 89, which would reflect in the sales to 90, right? So we look at that and look at those juggernauts that are going on in there. We got a couple Batman titles. We got X-Men, of course. We got Wolverine. We got Punishers up there, Spider-Man. We got all these X titles. New Titans is back with Perez on the book. That's doing pretty good. And look what's here. West Coast Avengers. That's number 12. Now, they also have number 15 is the Avengers. So they, at the same time, they're doing the Acts of Vengeance. If you go to this X-Men title, the X-Men have an Acts of Vengeance sort of thing on it. That's the Acts of Vengeance, whatever. Let's get out of that. So that's could be why there was a little bump up at that period. But you can see they're trying to do things to bring some energy to the book. I think after that, Byrne had Spider-Man in the regular Avengers title. And let's escape out of this. So I think I can always come back to that. Escape out of this. Let's go to here. And if we go to 1990, in 90, no, that went too far. In 1990, we got the Acts of Vengeance that are here. And then we got this Spider-Man in the Avengers storyline. So we got things sort of happening. But the title is kind of, post this part, is in, I think, Fabian Nicieza. He covers this period. He's got sort of a fill-in period. Then Larry Hama is on the book around here. So we could attribute maybe the success that happened in 90 to this Acts of Vengeance, Spider-Man, and then I'm not sure what else is going on here. But let's go back to the sales, which is kind of, let's get out of this for a second. Stop sharing. And share. Let's go back to this. So gratefully, somewhere in here, there's the Kree-Shire War, the Galactic Storm, and sales is still, actually it's going down, then it goes back up. Let's look at 92. Because there's a bump up around in 92 to 93. So that'd be a good period to look at, to kind of say what's going on in the book. What would kind of bring this book back up? So let's see. Let's go back to our Avengers to 90, 92. Yep, that's exactly what I said. So we have Galactic Storm is going on, a big Avengers crossover. So that's giving the Avengers a little bit of life during this period. And then anything else? We have Galactic Storm going on. It looks like it's only two. I thought it was forever. Looks like it's only like 3 months. And they have and this is what I call, do we have any of them? We have it here. We have the members only Avengers right here. So we have the Avengers with these members only jacket. We've changed Dane, the Black Knight, into this sort of Martin Riggs, Bruce Willis sort of action guy when he was a very stuffy sort of character. And now he's sort of the man's man in this book, which is, he was very sort of a old school sort of character, like, because he's basically a man out of a different time, even more so than Captain America. But it looks like there was some interest that was going into this book in 92. So maybe I cannot look at, maybe I have to look at this period a little differently. Let's go to 93. Oh, we got some buzz, we got some cover. Oh, we have blood ties. So we got a couple of crossovers going on here in the whole Proctor storyline that's going on here. But we have, let's look at this. This is the 30th anniversary special, even though the Avengers look a little wacky in these things. But then we have blood ties. So this is an X-Men crossover with the Avengers. And so I would think that would be, even though there's a wacky picture of can you tell that's Hercules up there? But it's there. So, and at some point after this, so maybe at the same time, here's Blood Ties and X-Men Avengers crossover. So a lot of things are happening during this period. Maybe it's also because of the big sales, but then some part after this, despite all this, a little bit of, let's get out of this. Let's go back to my, then there's a big drop down, and this is the crash. So whether they were getting their footing, well, it's not doing the numbers that X-Men were doing or what Roger Stern was doing, or even Byrne or Larry Hama was doing, or David Michelini was doing, or even Shooter's second run was doing. But no, I don't even know what to say. It's just free falling at this point. It's free falling, and then there's only one, as they said, there's only one book. There's this big bump up with the during the crash with the Avengers. Now they really wanted, I guess, more than this, which is why I guess they kind of reneged on what they gave to Rob Liefeld. But this is a big bump up, and then you see the George Perez Avengers sort of, is doing really well for the period. But then it goes back down, which is kind of hard to say, but it's a tough thing. And then that covers the sales of the Avengers, and seeing that Rob Liefeld. And then that's a tougher thing. Let's go back to, before I leave you guys with this, let's go back to our thing where we go to 19. Because at some point, when who was it? I think Rob Liefeld was talking about the Avengers, the Marvel people trying to fix the books. Right? So here's right before this is 95. So if we go to 96, you see them trying to fix the Avengers. And they got Mike Deodato's on there. And look at what they did to the Wasps. They sort of gave her a totally new look. And you think Mark Waid comes in the book at some of Harris is still writing it right this period. But let's keep going. something happens. I think this is the Teen Tony sort of storyline. Quicksilver gets a nice cool outfit in this period. Let's get rid of that because we keep going back to it. Thor gets a makeover too. There's Teen Tony. If you see they're trying. Hawkeye gets a cool outfit. Um, Scarlet Witch gets an outfit that's totally not her, but I mean, it's Scarlet Witch. She's gonna look good and everything, especially done by Mike Diodato in there. Let's keep going. Thor, I think Walter Simonson said he looks like he's in pro wrestling. And what else is going on? But they're trying to get the book back. And you see with the art just closer to what the period is. Except for Cap, he sort of stays the same. But you see all these other Avengers that kind of been kind of updated with these cooler outfits and whatnot. And Mike Ringaroe in here. Let's get out of there. Let's keep going. So then, so they were trying to do it, but it wasn't really hitting with the fans. It really needed a name, and of course, the name would be Rob Liefeld. And this is what they say. I guess for the number of issues, this would be the big success, even though the number-wise, you would say, well, it's not as much as that, but it's only like 2 issues. So it's like that number for those sort of 2 issues that year is kind of huge. So, but I think if you look at the book, and this is obviously my Gitcore scans, the book is kind of like everybody, it's like a jam sort of issue, which is kind of not what you want for every issue, because you don't even, none of this chap Yep is drawing it. Maybe he should have just drew the whole thing. But then I think Rob Liefeld kind of comes in at some point. Like there you go. There's Rob Liefeld, and some new outfits and whatnot, and I guess that's Hellcat. I don't know. So there you go. That's to give you the big success of the Avengers. But with that said, I've been wanting to cover that period and go through sort of the ups and downs, because there's that period in the late 80s, early 90s where the book kind of, let's get out of this. Sorry. I've been wanting to cover this because there's that period in the late 90s, early 2000s where the book kind of struggled when Roger Stern leaves and Walter Simonson is trying to gain a buzz, coming with a new team, a team for his big stories that he would do in Fantastic Four later. But then he leaves, and the next thing you know, you have Byrne on it, and Byrne's on it a little bit longer than Walter Simonson. It's over a year, but at the same time, his Spider-Man joining the Avengers was kind of rejected. It was rejected after it was done. So they gave him approval to add him, and then of course they said no, he's got to come out. So I don't know if they looked at the sales figures and see that it was kind of feeding the Avengers title, that sort of thing. But ultimately they killed that, and it would happen later. So there's some buzz that was going on in the Avengers. I think while Byrne was doing it, you had Acts of Vengeance, Spider-Man joining. This big cosmic thing. The same with the West Coast Avengers. You had the Acts of Vengeance. Byrne had already bumped up the title with big sales. Decent sales, not huge sales, but decent sales. And then he had a big Magneto story and a big time thing that was going to run through both Avengers titles. So there was going to be a big buzz, but that was kind of cut off. So I don't know if we can look at that and say, well, I'm looking at it and saying they kind of, the editorial, these sort of things of pushing these people out, losing Roger Stern, Walter Simonson, Byrne on 2 titles. They'd already lost. Well, I mean, the book wasn't selling, but Steve Englehart kind of was out of the book also on West Coast Avengers. And then you have Larry Hama on there. And on the Avengers, he's only there for 6 issues. And I was just like, he had an interview in in Marvel Age. Like, was it only supposed to be a 6 issue? And he had a decent sort of start, trying to introduce some new villains and such. But ultimately, nothing happened. My last thing that I'd like to say is I actually got through this video. I can't believe it, because I've done it many times live and it didn't get through it. Let me just make sure that there's no one commenting as of yet. Nope, nothing. Right? So with that said, I want to talk about the hook of Bendis' New Avengers, where people talk about it and saying the Avengers was taking all of their popular characters and putting them into one title, and that's what the Avengers was. And I would like to correct that in saying that Marvel's most popular characters, as in the Human Torch, got his own title. The Thing joined up with the Human Torch when that was struggling, but their most popular character were Thing and the Human Torch. They were not put into the Avengers. At the same time, I guess Thor, who would be considered the biggest success out of these Avengers characters, the Hulk didn't even have a title, so he can't be considered one of the more popular characters. Now we look at it and say, hey, it makes sense. Cap, at the same time, he started in the Avengers, so he got introduced in the Human Torch comic of him coming back, but it was a phony. So ultimately, there was a little buzz, so they kind of tried to bring him back in the Avengers, but at the same time, they did the same with the Human Torch, with the Submariner and Fantastic Four issue number. What issue was that? That was issue number 4, right? So this is the classic thing of Marvel bringing back these older characters in their titles. So we didn't have them actually put their popular characters in it. Then once, at some point in the 70s, their most popular characters was Spider-Man and the Hulk. And they were almost forbidden from being in the Avengers. There's no real story of them. The Hulk probably pops up. I can't even remember Hulk being in any Avengers story in the, besides Avengers 100. He shows up in Avengers 100 and possibly an annual. But in the 70s, the Spider-Man and the Hulk are the popular characters are not thrown in there. Then later, the X-Men get hot. And I don't think they put any mutants in the Avengers in the 80s. So that would take a while before we would get outside of the Submariner being put in there in the 80s, but he wasn't going off any mutant popularity. So I think ultimately they just wanted to make sure they had a big seller, since the Avengers was the big title and they were kind of pushing back the X-Men and the Fantastic Four. So they needed something to be big, and which he was. And it's kind of solidified Bendis as this guy who's a big seller and his big success, even though the storyline utilized an old Burns story of Scarlet Witch. But I mean, a lot of artists use other people's a lot of creators use other people's stories to sort of solidify their next story. So I mean, it was a success. It wasn't necessarily my cup of tea, but I think people are fond of those sort of stories, even though it's kind of, if you look at some of the art, they've had characters where one of the hard things about comic books is when you have like most of these characters outside of Iron Man and Thor kind of ground, and Wasp, these guys are ground level characters. So the way Kirby would have the fights is most of the fights would be at ground level. In I think if you look at some of those Bendis Avengers, they'd have these air fights. And Spider-Man would have some webbing on Wolverine, and Spider-Man would just be up in the air. But it wouldn't be drawn like, all right, Spider-Man has to keep swinging. He can't keep fighting. That's why Kirby had everything on the ground. And he would have certain characters that could fly, but most of the time they wouldn't get too high, because once you factor in the flight, you got to factor in speed, and no one ever factors in speed. That's why Angel always gets hit. Every time he flies to someone, he gets hit like he's not moving at any faster rate. So one of the things is, if you look at some of the artwork in there, some of the stuff is kind of wacky, and some of the characters who Wolverine is a ground level character, so a lot of his stuff you have to do a lot of cheats. So I think I covered as much as I could. I've corrected some of the things from the Comichron thing of giving the success to not only Jim Shooter, but give it to David Michelinie, Perez, Roger Stern later on, keeping the sales going up, Al Milgrom, and even John Buscema, who came back to the book. So that sort of success, sort of the blip that it possibly could have went up, but it seemed the editorial stuff, kind of a lot of people got pushed out. I don't know what we can say that. I don't know why. It's in truth, we have two sides of the story: Burns' reasons and editorial saying he didn't want to do his story after it was sort of approved. So I don't know, and I don't know why Larry Hama was off of that book, but but we know that they weren't allowing Walter Simonson to do the team that he had put together, which was approved. So it was very, I think Burns said the same reason why I was pushed out is the same reason why I realized the same reason why Walter was pushed out. So, and ultimately the big success of Rob Liefeld, I don't think the start of it was very strong, but it would have been interesting to see if they just let him finish, or if he sort of took the pay cut to do the rest of the series, because it would have been, I mean, they had the guy Stephen Platt. If he was kind of on it, or Rob was coming back to the Avengers, I don't know. It sounds, what he talked about sounds interesting, and hopefully he would do a consistent book. But